ultimately, what I want to talk to you guys about is debunking anti-Semitic conspiracies. But I'm going to start by covering the work that we did debunking conspiracy theories more generally, which was then the jumping off point for this sort of newer work. The stuff that I'm going to talk to you about today, this is its public unveiling for the first time. I haven't presented any of the anti-Semitic debunking stuff before, so you guys are the first set of eyes. Okay, so conspiracy theories, which are theories that explain events in the world as being caused by secret and malevolent plots involving powerful, secret conspirators, are often quite implausible. Sometimes, there are true conspiracies that sometimes powerful people do conspire, but in general, a lot of popular conspiracy theories are very obviously wrong. And yet they're widely believed. Previous estimates have found that something like half of the US population believes at least one clearly incorrect conspiracy theory. And so the research questions that motivated this whole agenda is like, how is it that people can believe these things, given that they're obviously not true? The belief in conspiracy theories is typically used as an example of the kind of belief that doesn't respond to evidence. Since there's all this kind of debunking evidence out there, if people believe the conspiracies, that must be because they're ignoring the evidence. And there's a whole sort of like subgenre of psychological theories that have been proposed to try to explain why people ignore evidence, that sort of center around the idea that people want to believe in conspiracies because they offer lots of benefits, like a feeling of control, of thinking the world is predictable, like feeling that you're special, and unlike the sheeple that don't believe the conspiracy, and so on. And so this theorizing by the psychological theory basically says people believe conspiracy theories because they want to, and therefore they ignore the counter evidence. And so once somebody has adopted a conspiracy belief and they've gone down the rabbit hole, it's basically impossible to reach them. And this is something that I myself had said many times in the past. I've been doing research for about a decade on why people believe and share falsehoods. And I will regularly get asked, oh, how can you debunk conspiracy theories? And I basically was like, you can't. Once they believe it, it's too late. So like our efforts should really be focused on getting people to not believe them in the first place. So, that had been the way things were. But then as what sort of kicked off this particular research agenda is we're thinking about it. And we're like, well, maybe that's true, but maybe the problem is actually just that it's really hard to debunk conspiracy theories because they're really varied, particularly if the conspiracy theory isn't true, it's not constrained by the truth, and so everyone can have their own version. So lots of people believe lots of different conspiracy theories, and even for people that believe the same conspiracy theory, there's many different versions of it, and people have different pieces of evidence that they see as the key support for it. And so that means if you want to really effectively refute a conspiracy theory, what you need to do is you need to have access to a vast amount of information on a whole lot of different topics, and you have to have the ability to pick the right piece of evidence to respond to the person that you are talking to about. And in general, that's really hard. I don't know if any of you have tried to argue with conspiratorial family members, but if so, you've likely experienced this, where they will say, well, what about this crazy piece of evidence? And be like, I don't know, I never heard that before. It doesn't sound right. But like, there's like, what about this thing? And you don't have the ability to just say, oh, well, here's actually why that's not true. Here's why that's not true. And even in debates between conspiracy theorists and experts, you often see this kind of dynamic. And so what we were thinking is that maybe conspiracy beliefs are actually more resistant to counter evidence than people thought. It's just you have to come up with the right counter evidence. It's really hard to do it. And we were like, well, what is it that has, potentially can do this well? What has access to a vast amount of information and the ability to personalize in the context of conversations? Like, well, large language models, these new AI systems like GPT. And so what we did in this study is we tested whether a back and forth conversation with a version of GPT-4 Turbo that we specifically prompted to debunk conspiracy theories can effectively counter-argue against conspiracy theory believers. And an important point here is it's not that we had them go to ChatGPT and just saw what happened. It's like we built our own version where we set up our own prompt, which, as I'll show you in a minute, that explicitly tells the model to talk the people out of the conspiracy. So The question is, can this actually move conspiracy believers, or do their identities and motivations blind them to reason? So in this design, first we ask people in their own words, what's a conspiracy theory they believe in? In one experiment, we explicitly say that. In another one, we say, when do you think there's an event that was actually, explained by, secret plots by powerful actors? Here's one example. This person says, oh, the 9/11 attacks. I've seen lots of stories and videos. I think the government was behind it. And the evidence they have is that World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed, even though it wasn't hit by a plane. And Bush didn't look at all surprised when they told him about it. So he must have known that it was going to happen. Then the model summarizes it back, says, okay, this is the thing that you said, 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? And this particular person was like 100% in on 9/11 being orchestrated by the government. And then they have a 3-round back and forth conversation with the AI model. In the treatment, we tell them, okay, you're going to talk to an advanced AI about the questions that you just answered. And we tell the model that its goal is to effectively persuade the users to stop believing the conspiracy theory. And then we pipe in and we tell it whatever conspiracy they wrote. We told them how much they believe it. And we say, remember, persuade them that it's not supported, and get them to change their beliefs to be less conspiratorial. People randomized into the control, instead, they still have a conversation with the AI, but they talk about some random topic like cats versus dogs, or the medical system, or firefighters. And as an example for our 9/11 conspiracists, these are excerpts from the conversation. The model starts by saying, okay, thank you for sharing your thoughts and concerns. I understand, given the complexity, why people have doubts, but okay, let's talk about it. It's true that Building 7 collapsed, but that's because it was hit by debris from a tower that was hit by a plane. And it's true that President Bush didn't really respond, but it's not because he already knew about it. He was trying not to cause a panic. And then the person's like, okay, that might be true, but what about the evidence that it collapsed because of demolitions in the basement? And also, jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel. These are sort of classic 9/11 conspiracist talking points. And then the model's like, well, yes, people have speculated about demolitions, but the thing that sounded like explosions going off was just successive floors of the tower collapsing one after another. And it would take months to set up a controlled demolition in the basement. So there's no way they could have done it without getting detected. And it's true that jet fuel burns at 1,000 degrees Celsius, whereas steel melts at 1,500 degrees Celsius. But that misrepresents the physics of the situation. Steel loses half of its strength at just 650 degrees Celsius. So the burning of the jet fuel would have been plenty to make the steel weak enough for the tower to collapse. And then the person's like, all right, well, then why do we let these people into our country and give them lessons on how to fly a plane? They got past security, easily. And then it's like, yes, it's true that that happened, but you have to remember that before 9/11, there weren't security procedures in place to be looking for that kind of thing. And then she's like, okay, thank you for your response. You've been very helpful. So then after this conversation, we say, okay, now that you talked to the AI, let's go back to what we asked beforehand. At the beginning of the study, you said this thing, 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? And this person who started at 100% went down to 40% as a result of the model just consistently knocking down each piece of evidence they brought to bear to support their conspiratorial belief. So this is one particularly good conversation, but I will now show you the overall results. This is from the first experiment in our paper, which had about 1,000 American participants. This is how much they believed the conspiracy theory that they articulated before the conversation. Blue is control, red is treatment. You see there's no difference between them because nothing's happened yet. And the most common thing is for them to totally believe it. Also, we cut it off at 50 because if they're below 50, well, then we're like, okay, you didn't believe it to begin with, so you're not the people that we're interested in. So these are all sort of people that believe in some conspiracy theory. And then after the conversation, we see about a 20% decrease, like a full standard deviation decrease in belief as a result of the debunking conversation. And then we wanted to see if this stuck, so we followed up with them 10 days and 2 months later, and we find a totally robust effect where even 2 months out, they're still believing the conspiracies less. So we thought this was very exciting. You can also, we looked across all the different conspiracies that people talked about, and essentially for every conspiracy, this is how much they believed it afterwards. In the treatment, they believed it less than in the control, so it wasn't specific to one type of conspiracy or another. And we looked at does it work even for the people that really strongly believed the conspiracy beforehand? So this is how much they believed the conspiracy before the conversation, and this is how much their belief changed. And so what you can see is in the control in blue, nobody changed their mind, but in the treatment in red, they decreased their belief pretty consistently, regardless of how much they believed it. And in particular, even the people that were 100% all in beforehand still showed a sizable effect. We then also, in subsequent work, dug into what makes it work. And the conclusion is what makes it work is the facts and evidence. The more facts and evidence it provides, the more people reduce their belief. It doesn't work if you tell the LLM it needs to persuade, but you don't allow it to use evidence. And even if you label the AI as a human or as a counterpartisan, like a sort of Democrat AI or Republican AI for people on the other side, it still works. So really the thing that matters is the facts and evidence. And so this is a paper that we published in Science last year. There's, you can read the paper or play with it. And also I'll just drop in the chat right now the links to all of that stuff if people want to look at it afterwards. But now what I'm going to do for the rest of my time is talk about new work that we've done applying the same framework to the context of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. As you likely know, anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories about Jews have been deeply intertwined for, over 1,000 years. In the 12th century, these sort of blood libel conspiracy theories where they're saying that, Jews were murdering Christian children because they needed their blood for secret rituals, were, often used as pretense for, prejudice and violence against Jews. Even as Bob mentioned, the original accusation that the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus is itself a conspiracy theory, where saying the Jews conspired to get the Romans to kill Jesus. More recently, there's lots of conspiracies involving Jews exerting global domination. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was, a popular version of this about 100 years ago. And more recently, there's lots of conspiracies around the Rothschild and Soros families in particular, exerting control of the world. Lots of claims that Jews are exaggerating or fabricating claims about the Holocaust. And so what I want to do in this research project is ask two different questions. The first one is to say, are these kinds of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories as debunkable as conspiracy theories about the moon landing and JFK, or are these ones resistance to evidence, given that they have this very long history and also a deep connection with religious, ethnic, and ideological identities that make people more inclined to hold on to their anti-Semitic conspiracies in the face of evidence? And then the second question is, if we do manage to reduce belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, does that also reduce anti-Semitism to some extent? Because although there's clearly some relationship between anti-Semitism and belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, it's not sure what the direction of that association is. Like it may be that people believe the conspiracy theories because they're anti-Semitic, rather than being anti-Semitic because of the conspiracy theories. So these are the sort of two research questions that we're going to delve into here. And we're going to use a design that is similar to the design for the main conspiracy debunking paper that I talked about, but a little bit different. So, because we don't want to just straight up ask someone, what's an anti-Semitic conspiracy you believe in? Because I think a lot of people don't think the anti-Semitic conspiracies are anti-Semitic. So instead, what we did is we started off by having them rate their belief in 15 different conspiracy theories. Each one we said 0 to 100, how much do you believe it? And some of these conspiracy theories are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. So these are the 6 anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that we used. We got these from discussions with the, or from publications from the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League that have sort of been collating popular anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. So, world domination is like a secretive group with significant Jewish influence controls governments and media worldwide. Powerful Jewish families like the Rothschilds or the Soros family manipulate world events to advance their own interests. And the COVID pandemic was an engineered emergency in order to generate profits for Jewish pharmaceutical heads like Pfizer's CEO. Historical evidence supports the events of the Holocaust is unreliable or exaggerated. Jewish interest groups are deliberately attempting to alter the demographic makeup of the US in order to tip elections in their favor and advance their policy objectives. This is called like the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And then the 9/11 attacks were not Al-Qaeda, but it was Israeli operatives. So we see how much people believe these six, but then we mix them in with sort of more, like non-anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and like things around Oklahoma City bombing, aliens in Area 51, and so on. And then also some conspiracy theories that are actually examples of true conspiracies where there was conspiring happening. And so by having people answer this, we can find who are the people that believe anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And so that if they rated at least one of these six anti-Semitic conspiracies theories greater than 50 on this 0 to 100 scale, so they had some level of belief in it, then we say, okay, let's talk about this thing that you said that you believed. Just in free text, write out what exactly is it that you believe about this, and what is the evidence that you see supporting it. So they type all of that out, and then we say, okay, as in the other experiment, we do an AI summary, one sentence summary. This is the thing that you said you specifically believe. How much do you believe it, 0 to 100? And then, as I'll describe in a minute, we go on to try to debunk it. But before doing that, I was just going to give some descriptives of like at baseline what people are saying here. So in this experiment, we recruited about 2,400 Americans, equally split Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And if you just look at how many of the six anti-Semitic conspiracy theories did they believe, we find that about half of the people believe at least one anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So, that is pretty similar to non-anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Although, really, that's pretty striking when you think about there are so many more non-anti-Semitic conspiracy theories than anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that this is really a quite high rate of belief in these theories. And if you look at which specific theories are people believing, by far the most commonly believed one is that the Soroses and the Rothschilds control the world, essentially, followed by Jews more generally controlling the government and the media. And the least common one was about the Holocaust being exaggerated, although still about 10% of the people found that plausible. And then if we also asked them to rate 0 to 100 how favorably they saw a bunch of different religious and ethnic groups, including the Jews. And this is sort of people's 0 to 100 rating of favorability toward Jews. So there are a lot of people that are very favorable to the Jews at baseline. There's a lot of people that are kind of like, meh, and then there are some people that are really expressly negative. And as one first piece of evidence, this is similar to things that have been found in other contexts, we just look correlationally at how somebody's endorsing of conspiracy theories relates to their favorability of Jews. And what you see is that in red, you see that the higher the percentage of the anti-Semitic conspiracies they believed, the less favorable they are towards Jews, with like a pretty large magnitude there, unlike belief in true conspiracies in green, or even the sort of aliens exist type conspiracy theories where there's not that much of a relationship. So basically, like, believing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories is uniquely linked to being negative, having a negative impression of Jews. Okay, so now what we want to do is see, can the model sort of address these conspiratorial beliefs? So people, after doing this initial stuff, they have this conversation with the large language model. In this study, we used Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and we randomized them across 3 different conditions. In the main treatment, the debunking dialogue, it's like in the other experiment, we tell the AI to persuade them that the conspiracy that they believe isn't true. And that's our sort of main treatment. And then we have a couple of other controls. In one control, which I'll call a minimum treatment, we tell the AI to tell the talk person out of the conspiracy, but we tell them it's not allowed to use any facts and evidence and arguments. So this allows us to say, like, the difference between these 2 conditions lets us say, how much is the effect that we're observing really about facts and evidence changing people's minds? And then we have a simple control where people just discuss an irrelevant topic with the AI. And then after the conversation, we re-ask them how much they believe the thing they specifically said, how much they believe just the general statement of the conspiracy theory, and how favorable they are towards Jews. So, okay, did it work? What I'm going to show you here is how much people changed their belief in their specific statement of what they believed after they had the dialogue. In the control condition, people don't change at all, which is what we expect. In the minimal treatment, where essentially the model just says, hey, that's anti-Semitic, you shouldn't believe it, but doesn't actually provide any facts debunking it, you do get a bit of a decrease, but not that much. But then when they have the actual debunking dialogue, you see a much larger decrease, like 15 scale points, 15 points on the 0 to 100 scale, which corresponds to about a 16% decrease, or more than a half of a standard deviation decrease, which in experimental behavioral science is a very large effect. Also, we followed up a month later, and we found that about half of the effect was still observable a month later. So it's also a pretty durable effect. If you look at the instead, people of this saying, how much do you believe the specific thing that you wrote? We'd be like, okay, this is the conspiracy theory that you said you believed beforehand. How much do you believe that? You find very similar effects. Just telling them it's anti-Semitic doesn't do anything, but actually debunking it reduces it substantially. And so now we say, okay, so these models can actually reduce belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And so then the question is, what effect does that have on people's favorability of Jews? And so remember, the way that we measured this is we said they had the series of questions, these presented in random order, and say, I view each of these with a 0 to 100 scale from very unfavorably to very favorably. And what I'm going to show you now is how much the conversation changed people's favorability ratings of Jews based on how they felt about Jews before the conversation started. And so, for the people who before the conversation were already favorable towards Jews, there's no significant differences across any of the conditions, which kind of makes sense that if they were already reasonably favorable, then you're not going to, expect to necessarily make them more favorable. But among the people who were originally unfavorable, the people that you might say are sort of anti-Semitic at baseline, you see this pretty striking result where there's, the minimal treatment doesn't do anything, but actually debunking the conspiracy does make them substantially more favorable towards Jews. And so if you look at the people that are initially unfavorable, you get about a 7-point increase, which is like a 25% increase in favorability, or close to a half standard deviation increase in favorability. So again, in the sort of prejudice literature or prejudice reduction literature, that's quite a large effect. So to summarize this, I think across all of these studies, we show that evidence and arguments can actually change beliefs about conspiracy theories, including anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And that means that people's psychological needs and motivations and identity and prejudice don't totally blind you once you've adopted a conspiracy belief. It just requires detailed, tailored evidence to help pull people back. Although also it's important to note, it's not like it convinced everybody not to believe the conspiracy theory. What we found in the main paper was something like a quarter of the conspiracy believers got talked out of it by the AI, and I expect it's similar in the anti-Semitic conspiracy. So it's like there are a reasonable chunk of people that are reachable through this approach. Then we also find some evidence for a causal role in anti-Semitic conspiracy belief in anti-Semitism, because when you talk people out of believing in a conspiracy, it makes them, the people that were originally anti-Semitic, it makes them a more favorable, have a more favorable impression of Jews. So overall, in addition to this sort of conspiracy-specific conclusions, this highlights the persuasive power of these large language models. And we've been doing a lot of work in my group of essentially trying to find like socially beneficial applications of this kind of human AI dialogue, where again, it's not sending people to ChatGPT, but it's building our own instances that explain things to people and correct misperceptions. So for example, we found that conversations with these chatbots can keep increase people's belief in climate change and their willingness to make sacrifice. It can make people, care more about the environment. It can make people more inclined to vaccinate children. It can make people more likely to donate to efficient charities instead of their, baseline favorite charity. It can make people, it can help explain structural underpinnings of the racial wealth gap in the U.S. It can also affect public health attitudes, like, increasing support for overdose prevention centers. And so like even for lots of attitudes that were thought to be resistant to evidence, these dialogues can have large effects. And I think that what explains it is that basically these models are good teachers, and particularly they're good tutors. They can figure out what it is what it is you're confused or misinformed about, and then specifically correct the things that need correcting, and provide sort of compelling evidence explained in a clear and compelling way. And there are certainly many nefarious applications of this technology. We're also doing research on some of that, like threat assessments around political persuasion and talking people into conspiracies and all that kind of stuff. But there's also great potential for positive use cases. And so, like I said, that's what my research group is largely devoted to, is trying to develop these kinds of positive ways to use this technology. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to the many great people in my research group and some of the organizations that gave us money. If you want to get in touch, this is my email address. And as like a sort of shameless plug, there was a time that there was lots of funding for research on correcting misconceptions, but both the government and the tech companies seem to be much less interested in correcting misconceptions these days. So there is in general less support for this kind of work, but financial support makes this sort of stuff possible. So thanks so much, and I'm excited to do Q&A.